From your work in the elementary school
Hmm.
and then going to the high school
Right.
to do the music in the chorus, somehow or other you got involved more with theater.
That's theater in high school. I was lucky. I had a theater teacher, and he ruled his department. He was his department. He would bring in technicians, he would bring in other people, but he was the teacher. And he taught all the classes, or almost all the classes. And it was his department. So you went into his world.
Hmm. And you've kind of moved on and had your own career here in San Francisco, the Bay Area,
Yeah.
continually working actor as well as directing, and now you moved toward opening
Producing.
your producing and opening
Yeah.
your own theater company.
Well, it's been 10 years this year.
Oakland,
Oakland Public Theater has been
10
around.
years.
It was conceived in 1998, and I actually put down a deposit on a space for the beginning of 99 for our first show.
Can you believe 10 years?
It's just, well, what's funny to me is some things never change. The first show we wanted to do was Blackballing,
Hmm.
and we had it scheduled to be in February. And there was another theater company that suddenly was interested in the play, and they promised the playwright they were doing a world premiere, and it was going to be a big deal, and they should let him. So they were going to do it in November.
Hmm.
So that was fine. That would have been a few months before us,
Sure,
and that was in
sure.
Sacramento, so it was no big deal. Well, something happened, and they had to postpone till April.
Hmm.
And they were very upset with the idea that this show would be here because we did it in Oakland and in San Francisco, and they were
Hmm.
really worried that the San Francisco papers would cover it
Yeah.
before their world premiere.
Hmm.
So after I'd already paid money to
Hmm.
get a space and get things set, our show got yanked out from under us.
That's part of the theater world. So, with Oakland Public having been around 10 years, there's
Yeah.
something special that's happening now. You're working on a project. Can you tell us
We're
a little
just
bit about
finishing.
that?
This weekend we're closing it's part of a big project that we did for the last year. We did something we call the Richard Wright Centennial Project. It's been going through Richard Wright's works, and we created 11 readings, 1 hour readings that we took around. Each month we took a different one around. So we did one for his birthday last year, and each month it was a different focus.
Hmm.
We talked about, and not just Richard Wright, but since the
But
play
before
that
we
we.
talk a little bit more about some of the other characters,
Mhm.
some people may not be familiar with Richard Wright.
Ah,
Could you give us a little bit about
sure.
who Richard Wright was?
Richard Wright was the first Negro author to have a bestseller in America. He wrote his book, and it became, once they started having a bestseller list, he got on the bestseller list with Native Son, this powerful novel set in Chicago about a black man who murders a white woman. And he intentionally picked the most provocative image he could think of to find a way to talk about what it was to be black in America and the struggles. And America was just stunned. And the book was a huge bestseller, and suddenly he was an official writer. That was his full-time job. And then he wrote his second book, Black Boy. And he actually had written a book before that was a collection of short stories, but his first novel was Native Son, and then Black Boy was kind of an autobiography about growing up in the South in Mississippi. So these were the things that launched him and put him on the map, and he became an international literary superstar. And after the second book did well, he decided he couldn't live here anymore. The first book, he had been allowed to travel the world. He met the Queen of England. He went everywhere. And when he got back, he suddenly found that it was really uncomfortable because segregation was still happening in America. He really wasn't happy that he couldn't just go to any restaurant he wanted or couldn't go into hotels, had to use the back door to go into certain businesses. He found that really frustrating, and he had a child. He had two, a little girl and a girl who was probably about 10 or so when that happened. And he just decided he did not want his children raised in that system, so they moved to France, and he lived the next 12 years, the rest of his life, in Paris.
Now, just sort of thinking and hearing you talk about
Mm-hmm.
the period when African Americans could not go into restaurants, had to go into back doors.
Right.
I mean, we talk about
Couldn't
that
buy
as
property.
as if it were a long time ago, as if it were ancient history.
Mm-hmm.
It really wasn't that long ago.
Well, it was
You know,
about 50.
years ago.
Yeah, about 50
And in terms
years.
of generation and a half,
Right.
in terms of life and generations in general, that's a real short period of time.
Right.
So some things have happened to make it seem so strange.
Right.
One reason I'm saying this also is that last week I went back to Nashville. I had a sister who was involved with the civil rights movement.
Uh-huh.
She was a freedom bus rider.
Right.
When she left Tennessee State University to go down to Alabama
Right.
to desegregate the buses and the counters, she of course was arrested, put in prison.
Mm-hmm.
When she got back to Tennessee State, as a result of some things about the regents, they were kicked out of school.
Right.
So last year, some people decided to honor them. So this year, they went back to Tennessee State, 14 of them, and they received honorary doctorate degrees for what they did in 1961.
That's
So that's why I'm
wonderful.
thinking that
Right.
it's not that long ago because it happened with my family. So, but let's know about what you're doing. So tell us
Well,
about
so
your show.
this local playwright, Richard Talavera, got really excited with the centennial coming up. It was just this September 4th was Richard Wright's centennial of his birth. And he wanted to write a piece about him, and he said he didn't want to see it as a celebration of the man. He wanted it to be more multifaceted than that. Because, well, one of the things he did in his readings was he found out that there are certain biographers, and each of the biographers focuses very specifically on what they think is important about Richard Wright. And they sort of ignore or downplay the other aspects. And so there are places where they clash. And he said he thought that was fascinating because it wasn't that they weren't speaking truth, but their truths were different.
Yes.
And so he wanted to bring all that out. And then there were a few key things. A black man living in Paris in the 1950s. That's not something we think of as an American experience. He was a part of the Communist Party right before the Red Scare, right before the whole McCarthy era. And he left the party just before all that stuff happened, but he was completely, his life and his career was completely affected by it. At the same time, because he had been involved with the party doesn't like it when somebody leaves the party.
Sure.
So
Now,
he was attacked by them as well. So he was being attacked by both the party and government agents while he was living in Paris.
and part of this, I was able to pick it up, go to one of the readings, and also go to the show,
Right.
is that people didn't always believe that he was being targeted. Now, there are some other significant people
Right.
that are brought to life in this piece. Who are
Right.
some of those other people?
Well, in the play, we decided we would focus on the end of his life, which is his years in Paris. And it turns out that he not only caused all this discussion and this new thinking about the Negro in America, the new Negro, they kept saying, there were people who were inspired to become writers. So Chester Himes was writing at that time. James Baldwin, who's a little bit behind them, starts writing, totally influenced by Richard Wright. And then there's another man who was more of a cartoonist than a writer, Ollie Harrington. But in the writing category, there's Ralph Ellison. There are these other people who are completely inspired by Richard Wright, so inspired that they actually follow him to Paris.
Wow. Now, tell us, how does this play explore what it means to be black today in 30 seconds?
Well, it's Richard Wright always seemed to be uncomfortable with this notion that being black meant something other than a human experience. So he seems to write a lot about what it is to be human and how being black, how you can be affected by the world when they only view you in this narrow box of what it is to be a black or to be a Negro.
Wonderful. Now, could you give us a few pointers on why an individual should go see this show?
Well, the other thing that we focused on was this business about his death. Richard Wright was a bit of a visionary, and people thought he was crazy or paranoid or that he was seeing things that weren't really there. Well, history tells us that he did see things that were there. And history, we don't deal with it a lot in the play, but before Martin Luther King was doing his marches and leading his protests, Richard Wright had written about it a good 15, 20 years earlier. Before Malcolm X, before the movement in Africa, the Pan-Africanism, Richard Wright was writing about these things. So it's a way for us to kind of say, wow, this man is struggling to try and get his message out and to tell people about the world that he sees, and at the time nobody could see it, and that was why he's been kind of forgotten.
Wonderful. And what has this experience been for you in 15 seconds?
This experience for me has been it's been a wonderfully creative challenge to try and get all of this material squeezed into one evening of theater, and I think we do it.
Thank you very, very much, Norman. This has been a wonderful segment speaking with you. Again, you've been watching AfroSolo TV. This is Thomas Robert Simpson, the founder and the artistic director of AfroSolo. On the first and third Fridays of the month, we are here at SF Live with some of the major African American artists in the Bay Area exploring what it means to be human through our experience. Please join us next time.